Hello, and welcome back to the PowerPlay Series. I'm Darren Peters, founder and managing partner of the Peter Damon Group.
And I'm Cericia Nelson, his trusty co-host.
Hey, folks, we're very excited to bring you another exciting guest. You know, he's been one of the hardest working leaders in higher education for more than 2 decades now, I believe.
Absolutely, he is. He's the Dr. Walter Kimbrough. Say hi, Dr. Kimbrough.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Well, Dr. Walter Kimbrough. So what should we call you today? We're going to call you Doctor. We're going to call you Walter. What you want us to call you?
You can call me wherever you normally call me, even though I guess you can say that out loud. It's not too bad. So
Okay, I'll stick with either Walter or Dr.
Okay, that's fine.
Walter Kimbrough, also known as the Hop Prez, burst into the HBU scene in 2000 as Vice President of Student Affairs at Albany State University. He parlayed that experience into becoming one of the youngest college presidents of the time at Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2004. After 8 years leading a renaissance there, in 2012, he made the leap and moved on to Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he spent the last decade as president until stepping down this past summer. Right now, he's taking a career intermission, which we're going to learn more about. But he's serving as in an interim capacity as executive director of the Black Men's Research Institute at Morehouse College. So again, welcome, Dr. Kimbrough. Glad you're a guest on the PowerPlay series. We're going to get into these questions.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Well, I'll start there and I'll go because I did just reference it. You recently did something that's kind of fairly uncommon. You stepped down from the presidency at Dillard University, and you didn't have another presidency or another job, I'm going to say, lined up. Right. So what made you believe that it was time to step aside?
So if you look at it, at least from the research perspective, they'll say 7 to 10 years is probably a good amount of time to be in one place. Being a United Methodist preacher's kid, the United Methodists talk about an itinerancy where you move, around every 7 years or so. So it's, congregations grow, and at a certain point in time, they need something different. And I would argue the same thing for colleges and universities. They're living organisms. So, Philander in 2004 was very different from Philander in 2012. Completely different places, even though they were in the same location. Mm-hmm. So the same thing, Dillard was very different in 2012 than it was in 2022. And so just sort of paying attention to that, watching people that I know who've been presidents. And I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. Norman Francis was at Xavier almost 50 years, right, but he's a unicorn. Right? So, I mean, he's a very unique figure, but I've seen people stay places 20, 30 years and they retired on the job because they're comfortable. Nobody's going to bother them, but they don't do anything exciting. They aren't moving the ball forward. And I'm not built that way. Dillard was actually the longest I've worked anywhere. So I'm like, that's 10 years. But it's like, you're going to just step out there and say, I'm going to do something different. So I called Janetta Cole. She did the same thing at Spelman. Going into her 10th year, she was like, that's it. And I mean, she had just raised all kind of money. And then people just like, why would you do that? So I called her and I was like, Dr. Cole, why did you make that decision? She said, it's good for the institution and it's good for you too. And that was the final straw. I mean, I talked to other people. I was being very thoughtful about it, but if you've ever heard Janetta Cole, it's the way she says things too.
Listen,
that you were just like,
yes,
yeah. There are no other questions to ask when she tells you the way that she says it that emphatically. So it was definitely the right thing to do.
Well, I want to ask you about one of the points you made where you said that both Dillard and at Philander Smith, they were considerably different from the time you started and the time you left. Can you explain a little bit about what those differences may have been?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about Philander at the time, just in terms of the student body, Philander, like a lot of HBCUs over time, did not have a plan to figure out how do we compete post Brown versus Board. So you could go back and go into the archives like I did at Philander, and you could look at the catalogs in the 1920s and 30s when they said, we'll only take A and B students. Then after Brown versus Board in the 70s, they're starting to say, well, everybody will take A and B students. We'll now take C students. And when I got there, I'm like, y'all taking D and F students, because the freshman class of 2004, a third of them had a high school GPA of less than a 2.0.
Yeah.
And based on the research, that means they have a 3% chance of graduating. The overall graduation rate was 16%. That was, I mean, you're taking people's money, they're not going to graduate. So by the time I left, you have a graduation rate that's above the national average for all Black students. Even though you still had a high Pell Grant student population, it was 70+% Pell. So that's very different, but it was more like what Philander had been in the 20s and 30s, the place that produced the Joycelyn Elders, the Robert Williams, the James Cone, the Cecil Cone, that kind of place. You start to see these folks. And so now I know there are Philander grads who were there when I was there, who've gotten PhDs, medical degrees, law degrees. We weren't producing anything like that early 2000s. So that was why that was different. Dillard was still coming out of Hurricane Katrina, even though that's 2005. When I got there in 2012, we still didn't have a full campus back. We didn't open up all of our residence halls until January of 2014. And so we were rebuilding in a different way as well to say, okay, now how do we become reestablished as an institution that can draw students from all across the country? We still had to raise retention and graduation rates as well, which we did. But it was trying to figure out, like, how do we get our place in the city and really grow that? And some of that had happened over time because there had been not a lot of turnover, but there's still been some turnover. And then you had Xavier carve out a big piece and Tulane. So Dillard was always viewed as a good institution, but it was lost. And so it was trying to figure out, like, okay, so we had the biggest hit for Katrina. Now that we've gotten everything back in place, how do we carve out a niche in New Orleans? And so that's what we did. So that makes it very different today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. So as a veteran higher ed leader, now you've got almost 20 years under your belt as a president alone. What do you see as the challenges and some of the opportunities? I mean, we hear a lot about the challenges of HBCUs, but what are some opportunities for HBCUs going forward for the future as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges are going to stay the same, particularly because HBCUs serve, I always say HBCUs are under-resourced institutions that serve under-resourced people.
Right.
So that's going to always be an issue. It's going to be exaggerated when and if we go into a recession. That's going to be a challenge. We're starting to see some of the challenges now because you've got kids who, during the pandemic, their K through 12 systems really did not function. And now they're entering higher education. They're missing really 2 years of school, and they're missing a lot of social skills. And people are seeing that already. That's not going to get better anytime soon. But I think the opportunity is, particularly post George Floyd, you have more and more students who are intentional about saying, I need to have an HBCU experience. They're coming from high schools that are very diverse, but some of them are catching hell in high school in terms of some of the issues with race and racism. So I've talked to more and more students, even now in Morehouse, talking to students, that's been very explicit for them. They're saying, I wanted this experience. So I think that's an opportunity. There was a time when, HBCUs was still almost the only game in town, and they didn't recruit actively Black students. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with one of my fraternity brothers. We went to Georgia together, and we both are from Atlanta. And if you meet either one of us, if we say we're from Atlanta, people assume we went to Morehouse. And I'm just like, no, Morehouse didn't recruit me. And I was student body president, number 2 in my class, went to a high school named for Benjamin Mays, who is the legendary Morehouse president. It didn't make any sense. And so there was a period of time when HBCUs did not actively recruit people like me. So I know that there are kids like me who would go to an HBCU. Same thing at Philander. They would go if people would actively recruit them. So I think that particularly now, there is much more of an interest in HBCUs. Popular culture has leaned into HBCUs even more, from Beyonce to the NBA, the NFL. So there are opportunities now. And I think that we have to lean into that to really provide a good experience for students. So, I think there's a great opportunity, but those challenges aren't going anywhere soon. And so we've got to figure out big picture, how do we get particularly federal support for students in terms of higher education, Pell Grants, and all of that.
Amen. Amen.
So Cericia mentioned earlier about you taking a career intermission while at the same time, staying fairly busy. Want to congratulate you on your role as the interim executive director of the Black Men's Research Institute at Morehouse. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what you hope to accomplish while you're there?
Right. Morehouse received a grant from the Mellon Foundation last year to really focus on Black men's issues. And I mean, it's interesting. They've tried this even going back to around 1990 to start doing research out of Morehouse because it's the only all men's HBCU in the country. But, having a conversation with the president and the provost, everybody still doesn't think about Morehouse first when they're having conversations about Black men. So, for example, in this election season, and particularly in the state of Georgia, there's a lot of conversations about the role that Black men will play in determining who will be the next governor and senator. But a lot of times when people are looking for the experts and policy makers to address those issues, they're still going to Emory, they're going to Georgia State. So it's like, how do we galvanize the faculty that are there to promote the work that they're doing to make sure that they're understanding that? And then particularly Morehouse is interesting because there's this idea, and I've always heard about being a Morehouse man, but that's after you graduate. While they're there, they're men of Morehouse. And so, but what does manhood and masculinity mean at Morehouse today? There was an article in Vibe that was controversial maybe 10 years ago called The Mean Girls of Morehouse. And it talked about the brothers on the campus that are wearing crop tops and dresses and full makeup. And so that created some tension. And so at one point in time, they created a policy saying you can't wear women's clothing. And then that was rescinded. So part of the work will be internal to say, how do we deal with that issue? How do we talk about manhood today at Morehouse to get into that conversation? And then how do we become a resource for people all around the world when they have questions about Black men in particular, that there are people at Morehouse that are doing work in that area. And so this position will help try to coordinate some of that. We'll do some public facing events. We recently had a lecture with Roland Martin to talk specifically about the midterm elections because people are talking a lot about Black men. We'll do a symposium every year. In the spring, we're going to do our symposium about Black men's mental health. So we'll do some things that are for the broader Atlanta community as well. But it's several layers to it. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. We just started the search for the permanent director. So I'm really spending time trying to share that information with people nationally so we can get somebody really good, because it's an opportunity for Morehouse if they really lean into it. And I think people understand that. So I'm just glad to be able to fill the gap for this year. I tease people, it's like I finally get to be a Morehouse man for a year at least. I keep telling them I'm waiting for my honorary degree for those kind of things. But growing up in Atlanta and having the chance to spend time in Atlanta and work at Morehouse has been good. And it's just been good not to have. I was teasing the president the other night. They had some car break-ins on campus. I was like, see, yeah, nobody's calling me at night. They're calling you. And so, I just to have a break and to look at things very differently has been good for me. So it's been, in many ways, a professional development opportunity for me as well. To, put some things in the foundation for the college, which I'm excited to do. But just for me to grow and get a different kind of experience and to be reflective has been it's been rewarding.
I think that's so bold. I mean, I've told you that privately and personally, that I think it's just if more of us should take, advantage of opportunities like that. We tend to think that we have to keep going in the same direction. And many of us don't pivot in our careers. Darren has pivoted in his career in a way. So I love that you guys are doing that and setting examples for our sons and nephews and grandsons, that it's okay. And it's okay to stop and reassess and to grow in different ways. So kudos to you for that. So I do want to talk to you. I think some of the things that you've said are really about evolution in HBCUs. I hear evolution in you personally and professionally. And so you wrote a book a long time ago. You're an expert on Black Greek letter organizations, and now talking about evolutions, it's almost coming up on its 10th anniversary. Your book, Black Greek 101.
Actually, 20.
20 years?
Yeah, 20 next year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. 20 years, Black Greek 101. talk about evolution in Black Greek letter organizations, sororities, and fraternities. There's been a lot over the last 20 years. Are any plans do you may have to republish the book or to update it in any way?
Yeah, you're
Second edition, maybe?
Yeah, you reminded me. I had some preliminary conversations with the publisher. It's through an academic press, so a lot of times they're really slow. I just need to follow back up with them. But if I can, if they can do a re-release in 2023 with some additional chapters, I mean, I have work that's ready that I can, pop in and keep it moving. So hopefully that'll be something to be able to do, to talk about it. But I mean, this is an opportunity for those groups. I've been doing some presentations recently, and particularly once again, post 2020, with the activism that's going on, the whole Kamala Harris effect. This gives these groups an opportunity to really play a role in terms of politics and policy. I think it's a great opportunity. So, and we're starting to see people lean into that. When Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was up, the Deltas came out the woodwork. They put pressure. They did the same thing with Loretta Lynch as well. So, I mean, you're seeing these groups now be very active in politics and dealing with policy. And I think that's really good too. So it's an opportunity to pivot away from just all the craziness that we normally hear about them,
right.
to deal with something that will impact communities. So I'm excited about that. I hope the groups will lean into it. And when I have a chance to talk to groups, that's one of the things I always say, like, if you look at what the groups are doing, particularly in different locations, it's a lot of this voter education and registration and, stroll to the polls and all those things. I think that's been great.
Yeah. So with the book, if you re-release it, will you incorporate some of those?
Yeah, it'll be to talk about how that, how there has been a history of that, because people don't always recognize that there has been that, in one of the presentations, I showed this iconic picture of Calvin Coolidge when he was president. You got members of Kappa Alpha Psi at the White House. I said, we didn't see another picture like that until Barack Obama, and there were members of Delta Sigma Theta, the national president at the time, Cynthia Butler McIntyre, is a graduate of Dillard. And so you've got her in there with Alexis Herman and all these other high pro. So it's 50, 60 years between those kinds of photos. And they should be much more prevalent and much more regular, that those groups represent a large constituency. So I think that this is a great opportunity for those groups.
Speaking of book writing, I'm in the process of writing a book, so I know it's not as easy as what most people think. As a matter of fact, it's taken me a few years.
Yeah.
What was the process that you went through to try to get your book out?
So it was, I decided I wanted to do an academic book, and I hadn't thought about doing one, but right before I started working on the book, in 1999, I was in California speaking and met Lawrence Ross, and he wrote the book, The Divine Nine. So I did a presentation. He was there, and he was like, man, you need to write a book. And so he's just telling, like, here are some resources, you read up and figure out how to do that. And so my mom has written, like, I don't know, 20 books or something like that. And she was just saying, you have to write a little bit every day. And that's how I got it done at the time. So I was working at Albany State at the time. And the easier part was it was just me. So no wife, no kids. And I'm just, I go to work, come home and write every day. And I was able to knock that book out. But that's part of it. It's just dedicating some time, whether you spend a couple hours, whether it's like, man, let me just, get this page done today and that's it. But I think that habit of writing every day was the process. So at some point when I, write another book or so, I know what it's going to take to be able to do that. It's just now, being focused and, not saying, man, I need to catch up on Game of Thrones or Dragons. Because I mean, those are the things. It's like, I don't feel like writing. So let me, like, I'm just thinking now, like I missed Abbott Elementary from the other night. So I need to write Abbott Elementary, So those are the kind of things that I have.
Don't miss House of Dragons, because it's
no, yeah, I can't. Yeah, it's been good. So
that's a little known fact about Walter Kimbrough, is that he watches television. And when he gets into a show, listen, I remember back in the day, he loves some Flavor of Love. So he's an academic, but trust me.
Look, I'm watching tonight is the finale of Ready to Love. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes,
Nephew Tommy. Oh man, I love Ready to Love. That's just, trying to figure out which couple's gonna make it. That's my Friday night show,
Yes. He's an academic, but trust me, on these reality shows, nobody can beat him. He knows about him, he can talk about him, he can write about him, he can pontificate, and he is there watching. You mentioned it a minute ago, wife and kids. And so, of course, he has a lovely wife. who's an attorney and a powerhouse in her own right, and he has a couple beautiful children. How do you balance? And right now you're really balancing. You're in Atlanta, and I assume that they may be in New Orleans still. So how do you balance all of this, writing books and lecturing and doing what you're doing at the Black Men's Research Institute? What's the balance in that for you as a family man?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the challenge is, at least for this year, is the back and forth. Now, Morehouse is really, I think, generous, because I told him, I was like, I got to be able to spend time at home. I can't just be, posted up in Atlanta the whole time. And they were really good about that. And, particularly, COVID taught people how to do a whole lot virtually. Yeah. So, I'm, part-time virtually. So either I usually spend a week in Atlanta, a week here, or, splitting weeks. So those kinds of things, which helps because, Adria travels some for her job with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, recruiting students who will apply, for this full ride scholarship to go to law school. So we have to juggle if she's going to be out of town and I need to make sure I'm home, those kinds of things. And then just supportive of the kids' schedules. Benjamin has the most active schedule now because he's still playing basketball. I mean, so all throughout the summer he did AAU. So I'm traveling with him and he's doing different leagues. So if I'm, around on the weekends to go to games, that's good. The oldest, Lydia, started working, which is good too. So then she's got a couple of nights she can make her own money. She's busy. So that's cool. So that's, we try to find time to do things together as well. But no, everybody's staying busy.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Darren knows all about that AAU circuit, don't you, Darren?
Oh yeah, it's grueling. It's year round.
It's year round. That's right.
Oh man. Well, look, so you're no stranger to PowerPlay. I think Dr. Kimbrough was one of our, I don't know, what were you, a 25 most powerful,
people to watch, or
influential power players in Arkansas at the time. So he definitely understands and knows what PowerPlay is all about. So something that we ask all our guests is, if you can make one power play in the world, do something to change, make a significant change, impact, to dismantle a challenge or whatever it is, what would you do? And it doesn't have to be in your industry per se, but just something that you would do to change the world for the better.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there are lots of things. I just, probably being a prisoner of higher education space, if I could really get the major philanthropists to take a 10-year moratorium and not give to anybody that has a lot of money, and redirect all that money to HBCUs to build up their endowment so Black kids could go to school for free, that would have generational changes for people. I mean, people are complaining about student debt and all those kinds of things, but there are some HBCUs that have been around 150 plus years that have an endowment that's less than $2 million. Mm-hmm. It means they have no money. I mean, that's nothing. Versus, Harvard's endowment is like $50 billion. Mm-hmm. And so when people keep giving to places like that to just have money, it's like, Lee, if you had multiple billion-dollar endowments at some of these institutions, that they could help Black kids and other students who want that experience to go for free, that would just be transformative. So those are the kinds of things. It's like, how do you replicate the Mackenzie Scotts? She just started dropping money left and right, and people were like, who is this lady? Because it was just coming out the blue, and people were just trying to figure this out. And she, has given away $500 million like it was nothing. Mm-hmm. So there are people out there with that kind of wealth. So it's like, how do you convince them? So that's the power play that I would make, is to be able to get in all their ears and say, all right, and you're going to drop $1 billion here, and you're going to drop $1 billion there. It would be transformative for generations. I don't think people really understand that, because you still got students who they're in school taking out loans because they trying to take care of folks at home. People just don't understand how many students end up, and they talk about student loan debt. It's like, yeah, but part of that student loan debt is money that their mama had to take out because she can't get a loan from Chase. And so for that child to be in school, it helps them to pay some of their basic necessities. People just have no idea. So that's what I would do.
That would definitely be a game changer.
Yeah, that would be a game changer. And I think we ought to look at it the way we do. You were talking about on the book, just get committed to it and make it happen. Yeah, because it needs to happen.
Agreed. Definitely. Well, Mr. Hip Hop Prez, you're extremely active on social media. I'll tell the people for the world so the world will know who had you to get on Twitter.
Oh, see, I've always liked social media. So
You have.
when I got to Philander, that was 2004. That's the year Facebook started. So that was an easy way to share some of the events on campus. I had a micro blog of my own to do that kind of thing, just do some blogging. That was really good. And so it would have been about Benjamin's born 2008. So it was November 2009. And Sarisia had a consultant that we met with to try to tell me I need to do Twitter. And I was like, I do blog. I don't need it. What I need a micro blog for? I don't need that. So twisted my arm. So like I said, it was November of 2009 is when I got on Twitter. And I saw one article that said I was the king of HBCU Twitter, and I will accept that crown because I am. So yeah,
you are, but you were pushed by who? Say it again.
I said it once. I'm not saying it again.
I was like, "Hey, Doc, you call yourself progressive." He didn't want to do it.
I did not want to do it.
You need to get out here.
Do it. Like I said, I did Instagram. I did everything. But I was like, I don't really need that. And then, like I said, I know it was 2009, and that's my weapon of choice these days. You can do a lot, and it opens up, and it's just really interesting. Which I try to tell other presidents, or sometimes people say they're too old. I'm like, Gordon Gee at West Virginia is doggone 80 years old and is on Twitter, so I'm not trying to hear the too old stuff. But it's been a way that you can share information, and particularly it's a way that journalists find me. And I do an outsized number of interviews because I have journalists who are following me. They see what's going on and they send direct messages like, hey, can I talk to you about X, Y, and Z? So it's a great tool. And I just tell people, when you lead under-resourced institutions, I got a free tool to promote what's happening on campus and to connect with people. I've used Twitter to, get Hollywood people to do master classes with students. I mean, that's, you can't beat it. So
you heard it here, folks, for the record.
Yeah,
so how do folks? I'm never gonna let you live it down.
Look, I don't deny it. You get all the credit for that.
Okay, all right. Well, how do the people keep up with you? Where do they find you on the socials, and how do they learn about the Black Men's Research Institute and the work that y'all are doing there?
Right. So Twitter and Instagram both at Hip Hop Prez with a Z, and then LinkedIn and Facebook. You're just Walter M. Kimbrough. Black Men's Research Institute, Twitter, Instagram are BMRI 1867. Okay. So you can see both of them that way as well. So, yeah.
Well, we've come to that point in the program where we have to say goodbye. So we want to once again thank you, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, for stopping by the PowerPlay Series. And we wish you much success as you keep it moving forward.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
As a reminder, the PowerPlay Series is a monthly discussion of substantive and emerging ideas or initiatives with power players who are shaping our future with their dynamic and innovative leadership. You can catch the series on the Peter Damon Group social media platforms at Peter Damon Group on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Until next time, thank you for joining us.